can you give us some tips, or listeners some tips on, say you are here, I guess, actually, take a step back because
Okay.
I want to, even though you said that, we are seeing some convergence on how the level of process people are given and what their protections are, I do feel like it's helpful for people to understand like how those, at least in theory and previous to where we are now, and hopefully, what the courts will rein some of this in, but we have no idea.
Right.
But if you can just explain, like, what are the protections, for example, a temporary visa holder has, what protections a legal permanent resident has, a green card holder, and what protections does a citizen have, and kind of take us through those, at least according to the laws that are on the books.
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing for people to understand now is that they need to practice a little bit more caution. And that means no matter which of those statuses someone might have, I think that they need to carry some sort of proof on them of that status. Because if they're lumped into the same group as somebody, who's illegal or who has overstayed because ICE rounds up a whole group of people, they need to be able to show that they have a valid visa, that they have an approval notice from immigration. If they have a green card, to have a copy of that. I never recommend that people take originals and carry them because they might lose them. But certainly you want to carry proof of what your status is. There's something called an I-94 record, which every temporary visitor can look up online on the CBP website that shows that they're in status. It tells you until what time you're allowed to remain in the US. So people should probably print that out. The protections part is a difficult question to answer because technically anyone who's physically in the US should be given due process, meaning if they are charged with something that could lead to deportation, they should get a notice to appear in front of an immigration judge and be able to defend themselves. So the system, the law hasn't changed. The problem is, like you said, the courts have to, they have to interfere in this. If somebody has to bring a claim, and then they have to grant what's called a temporary restraining order, and then we'll see how that goes up the chain in terms of appeals and maybe the Supreme Court. So unfortunately, people will have to access the legal system and hire skilled attorneys to defend themselves. But the first thing they need to do is to carry those documents with them, because if they don't have any proof of their status, then ICE can just arbitrarily put them in holding, and then maybe, depending on how these cases are coming out, we've seen that, the hundreds of Venezuelans, for example, that were rounded up and put on a plane. Even after the judge granted the temporary restraining order, they still put people on a plane and sent them to El Salvador, Guantanamo, back to Venezuela. That could potentially happen, right, in other cases. So I don't want people to be paranoid because we're talking about a limited number of cases. But we also saw cases in New York City with a student from Colombia, for example, where freedom of speech now is apparently not allowed, right?
We saw
And
the
so,
student from Tufts as well.
yes,
I
and
don't
there's
think
more and
written
more of
op-ed
these.
is all that I can see that they're
And
charging.
I hate to say it, as two graduates of Georgetown Law and people who believe in transparency and in the Constitution, and that, if specifically due process and all these freedoms that anyone in the US should have, I do say to people, if you have opinions that are strong political opinions, it might not be a bad thing to just keep those to yourself for now, not go on social media and not publicly protest. And that's breaks my heart to say it because I think everybody should have that. It's an indomitable human right, according to our Constitution here. Not in every country, but a lot of foreigners come here and they love the fact that they can express themselves because maybe from where they're from they can't. But right now, I would tell people to keep those beliefs to yourself as much as possible because you may be targeted. So people have to be cautious and they have to practice a little bit of prevention, right? Don't put yourself out there in a way that could potentially get you in these situations where you might just be, not processed and removed, which is heartbreaking to think. I really believe everybody has their chance. They should have their chance in court to defend themselves, right? But that's not what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and I think we still have to see in terms of what plays out with the courts, in terms of the students, what if according to the laws, I could see it, is that on the books, it says that if the Secretary of State deems you to be some kind of risk to national security or something, like something having to do with national security, an adverse impact on national security, even I don't even think it's like a threat or a risk, that's grounds for deportation of a legal permanent resident. I don't think that has ever been challenged in court, that provision. So I think we will see what actual grounds do they have to produce in order to prevail on that claim. And that's, of course, hopefully, if assuming that there is a hearing and they're not just sort of somewhere summarily deported.